Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hey, on this video we're going to do a good little lesson on fishing Highland reservoirs, and I'm going to talk about how to fish them in all seasons. Alright, before we get started, please do me a favor and hit that like button and give me a subscribe as well. Alright, let's get right to it. So what we're going to talk about is first we're going to define what a Highland reservoir is. We're going to talk about some of its characteristics and what makes up a Highland reservoir. I'm going to give you some examples of a Highland reservoir. We're going to then talk about lures to fish in each one of the seasons, going from pre-spawn all the way through winter. And then we're also going to just discuss some other things to consider that you might want to keep in mind once you start fishing those reservoirs. All right, so let's first talk about what a Highland reservoir is. It's typically made up of deep and clear water, and that can obviously be relative depending on where you're at in the country. When I'm talking deep and clear, I'm usually talking about maximum depths around 100 to 200 feet, and average depths of around 20 or so. Relatively steep banks, and then we're talking about rock and clay bottom. And there's usually going to be a main river channel going through there, and then creek channels as well coming off of that. It's always typically going to have a dam. And there's usually going to be a mix of species in the reservoir between largemouth, smallmouth, and spotted bass. Just keep in mind that one of those may dominate the others as well. All right, some examples of Highland reservoirs are going to be lakes such as Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri, Table Rock Lake, Lake Lanier in Georgia, Lake Hartwell where their classic is going to be held, Lake Jordan, and then even out Lake Shasta out in California. All right, next we're going to talk about the baits to use. So getting right into it, we're going to talk about the pre-spawn, and this is what I'll call pre-spawn or early spring, and we're talking about water temperatures of about 45 to 55 degrees, and in this season we're going to be concentrating mainly on main lake points and secondary points. Brush piles are always going to play a factor, so I'll usually have that in there almost on every one of these. And then we're looking at about a quarter way to halfway back in the mouths of creeks is what we're going to concentrate on. Don't really want to go all the way back in the mouths of creeks just yet, just because we're trying to intercept those fish when they're moving in. All right. The first lure I'm going to use during this time frame is going to be a jerkbait. All right. Jerk baits are just great for this time. I'm going to be usually using a slow pause and just wait for that fish to load up on it. You're going to do, twitch, twitch, pause. Twitch, 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 pause, give it a good 5-second pause or so. Usually this time I use a little bit lighter line as well, especially in that clear water. But definitely want to throw those jerk baits over those points, main lake points, secondary points, quarter to halfway back in the mouths of creeks and all. All right. Next is going to be a jig. So the jig is going to be a staple on nearly all of these. And really, if you could pick one lure to fish year-round for quality fish, it's going to be a jig. So that's going to show up in every single one of these. I'll just tell you that right now. All right. Specifically during this time frame, we're going to be looking at a football jig. Like I said, fishing in those main lake and secondary points, just dragging it across there nice and slow. It's going to be the best way to catch those quality fish. Next is going to be some type of medium diamond crankbait, typically in a crawdad color, like the Spro rock crawler right here. Another one is wigglewort would be good. Something that dives down into that 9 to 12 foot range. You're going to work those pretty slow as well during this time of year. Also, a shaky head is going to be a player as well. And you're going to work that pretty much like you would that jig. Just throw it over those points. Work it real slow over those points, main lake and secondary points. And just work that on a light line, spinning rod, 6 to 8 pound test this time of year. And it's going to be a good player. Next is going to be a Kitech swim bait. This is a swing impact. You can also use any other small swim baits as well, but a swim bait in that 3.5 inch range is deadly this time of year. Again, lighter line, and throwing it out on those main lake and secondary points, dragging it across. Moving from the pre-spawn, we're going to go into the spawn, or what I'll call the late spring, mid-spring, late spring. We're looking at water temperatures ranging of about 60 to 75 degrees. Again, we're going to be concentrating now more on secondary points as opposed to main lake points. And now we're going to be going halfway to 3/4 of the way back in the mouths of creeks coming off the main lake. Now you can also go all the way back in, just look for some spawning fish. But typically we're going to concentrate halfway to 3/4 of the way back. And the first lure I'm going to be looking for is a searching bait, which I'm going to be using some kind of popper. In this case, it's a Pop Max. It's my favorite popper. You've seen some of my other videos as well. It's just a really good bait this time of year. You know, throw it out on those points like I am right here. I'm throwing it out over a hump. Just looking for fish that are, you know, going back, getting ready to spawn. And just make sure you're using, you know, a good medium action rod. I typically use mono instead of fluoro or braid. And yeah, just be ready on those poppers. All right, again, here's a jig. I told you that was going to be a player in every single one of them, so just get used to it. Next is going to be a shaky head still. And now I'll start using a white or silver shad color spinnerbait. Again, searching for fish. You know, we're fish are into that transition, getting ready to come up to spawn. They're moving from those main lake points back into the mouths of the creeks. So as we're looking for them, we're going to throw something that can cover water, and you know, spinnerbait does that a lot better than most other baits. And then a jerkbait is still going to be a player. We're going to start speeding up that cadence on the jerkbait here. Instead of that, you know, rip, rip, pause, you know, we can do rip, 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 pause, rip, 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 pause, you know, something like that. So going to be working it a little bit faster. Okay, moving from the spring and the spawn going into summertime. Now we're talking water temperatures of 80 to 90 degrees. Notice here we're concentrating more on offshore humps, main lake and secondary points. Again, brush piles, and then we can also mix in some docks in there as well. Here we're going to be using that walking bait again to be looking for fish that are busting the surface or that are hanging out over those offshore humps. This one is a Evergreen splash blows. You can also use a spook as well. That's what I'm using here. And just work that bait fast like you would, especially this time of year in the summer. They're going to be reacting and waiting for reaction baits, moving fast. So throw that out over the humps, throw it into shallow water along the points, and just get ready, because that's one of the my favorite way to catch fish is with the top water. Next, again, jig again. It's still coming off of there, especially once you get done, working that top water over the humps or over the brush piles. If they stop biting, you don't necessarily want to leave, because you never want to leave fish to go find fish. So throw that jig out there. Maybe they just need to bite something else instead of that top water. Definitely don't leave until you throw that jig out there and try to get those bigger fish. All right. You also want to have a fluke tied on this time of year. You can also put that one in the spring category as well, but you definitely want to have a fluke tied on. Anytime there's busting fish busting around the boat, you want to be able to just pick that fluke up real quick and fire it out at them, because if they're busting on top and you throw a fluke out there, 90% of the time they're going to eat it. So just be ready to throw that fluke out there. Next is going to be a drop shot. Just throwing that over brush piles, or on those offshore humps. Once they stop biting the top water, or if they're not biting it, then you can throw that drop shot down there with them as well. And then a big magnum worm. This is a zoom magnum worm. Throw that out over those offshore humps. Work it nice and slow through the brush pile, and that's a great way to catch some bigger fish. And then finally, a deep diving crankbait. I don't have many crankbaits on here, even though I like to throw them a lot. But I just found that these other lures work better. It's not to say you can't catch them on crankbaits, but definitely work a deep diving crankbait during the summer is a killer pattern as well. All right, moving into fall time frame, kind of where we're leaving right now. We're talking approximately 70 to 55 degree water temperatures, and of course they're going down instead of up now. We're going to concentrate again on points. Work into the backs of creeks as well. Look for fish that are chasing shad this time of year. And then towards the end of fall, we're going to start concentrating on ditches, which are basically just the center of a creek. You basically just cast right down the center of the creek, and we'll show you what to use here in a second. And then obviously concentrate on brush piles as well. So the first thing I like to use in the fall, especially when the fish are still chasing shad, is some kind of walking bait. This one is one of my favorites. It's a KVD Sexy Dog. I just change out the hooks on it because not that it doesn't come with bad hooks, or not that it doesn't come with good hooks, but I would definitely just change them out as well for something a little bit better. But walking bait, work it fast. Don't give them a good look at it, and just be ready and hang on because they'll crush this thing, especially when they're chasing shad. Like in this video here, if you can see, they're still chasing shad out there while I'm reeling this in. That's when you need a partner out there to throw that bait, throw something else at them, throw that fluke at them while I'm reeling this one in. All right, that's a good catch there. A lot of fun. Definitely keep that top water on. Like I said, a fluke, always keep that at the ready, especially this time of year as well. Next, we're going to be working that jerkbait back into the picture again. You can still work that one a little bit faster here, but as the water cools, that's when you're going to want to slow it down. Work it over those ditches. Any brush piles, work that over the brush piles as well. The jig, of course, all repeating on each one of these. And then now we're going to start throwing in a spy bait. So a spy bait is a pretty tough lure to fish, mainly just because a lot of people, myself included, don't have the patience to throw it. You've got to work it really slow. You got to work it with light line. We're talking 4 to 8 pound test at the max. Throw it out in the middle of those ditches. Let it sink down to a foot or so over those brush piles. Work it back really slow and keep it down there, and then hold on because they'll crush it when they hit it. But it just takes a lot of discipline to throw it. So definitely check that out as well, spy bait. All right, going into the winter time. Now we're talking water temperatures around 55 to 40 degrees, getting pretty low. I don't typically fish any colder than 40 degrees. I know some people do, but it just gets too cold for me. So around 55 to 40 degree water temperature. Again, we're concentrating on those ditches still, middle of the creeks, and then also looking for brush piles in deeper water. And you really got to use your electronics to find those things. We're going to be using the shaky head, which is definitely a player this time of year. You're going to have to work it a little slower than you did in the spring, though. That jerk bait, now we're back to working that really slow. Throw it out there, rip, pause, let it sit 5 or 10 seconds if you can, even longer. Then rip it again. All right, keep that on. And don't be afraid to throw a jerkbait on light line, too. I mean, you can throw a jerkbait on 6 pound test fluorocarbon and a spinning rod all day, and you're going to get that thing down there. So make sure you keep that on there, especially one of those mega bass ones. Spy bait still is a player. Same type, same deal. Throw it out, light line, work it really slow over the brush piles. The jig, of course, is still a player. During the wintertime, it's probably the best time to use it. Just work it really slow. You got to have patience. Work it over those points and in the middle of the creeks as well. And don't be afraid to drop a jig straight down into a brush pile. You can certainly fish a jig vertically. I know most people don't do it, but don't be afraid to do it. There's no rule saying you can't. And then a drop shot as well. During the wintertime, especially before it gets too cold, throwing a drop shot over brush piles is going to be, a deadly technique. Just be ready for it because it's not going to be, a big thump. All right. Some other things to consider. One thing mainly on these types of lakes, mainly always wear your life jacket, especially when you're running the big motor. Lake Lanier, where I just, where I was fishing recently, it's one of the most dangerous lakes in the country. I mean, you'll have half a dozen people die there each year. Just, people being silly and being idiots and, big waves, all kinds of stuff. So just make sure you always wear your life jacket, keep your head on a swivel, be safe out there. Don't get in any I'll call them boat rage, contests or anything like that. Always be safe out there and wear your life jacket. Always concentrate on points. If there was one structure you could concentrate on in this type of reservoir, it would be points because it's loaded with them, as you can see in this picture. Main lake points, secondary points, points, all the way back in the back. Just concentrate on points. If that was one type of structure you could fish all year, that would be the one. And then the one thing I would throw all year, if could only pick one lure, would be a jig over points. The way I like to think about it is it's certainly a lot of fun to catch, 20 fish on top water in the middle of summer. But most of them are going to be, around 2 pounds. And, in a tournament where you're only keeping 5 fish, that's 10 pounds. Well, if you catch 5 3-pounders with a jig and only get 5 bites, now you're 15 pounds and you're well into the money. All right, so just keep that analogy in mind. You know, you can catch 20 2-pounders or you can catch 5 3-pounders, but those 5 3-pounders are going to get you a lot more money. Also, stay on the move. You know, don't be afraid to run and gun. Most of the time, when you get to a spot, those fish are going to bite within the first 5 or 10 casts. You know, especially offshore or on a point or on an offshore hump or a brush pile. You know, throw in there. If they haven't bit it within 5 or 10 casts, move on to the next one, and just stay on the move, because that's how you're going to eliminate that water that's unproductive. Make sure you learn to use your electronics, and then once you learn to use them, make sure you trust them, because they're telling you what's down there. If you see fish down there, and don't be afraid to turn the boat around and actually throw to them, because you're never going to catch them if you don't throw to them. So trust your electronics when you see stuff down there to fish. Believe what they're showing you, in other words. And then always keep a fluke ready for busting fish. You know, fish bust all the time in these reservoirs, so always make sure you got a fluke ready. You know, I always keep one tied on at all times, and just have it ready. I have it, ready to cast anytime, because you want to catch them while they're busting. All right. So finally, what we covered, we talked about what is a Highland reservoir. We defined what it is, what it's made of. We showed some examples of Highland reservoirs. We talked about lures to use in each season. Keep in mind that jig was on every single one of them. And then we finally talked about some other things to consider. So definitely appreciate you watching. I definitely appreciate it. Thanks so much. Please do hit that subscribe button if you like this content. And, let me know if you like this kind of presentation. I know some people might find it boring, but hey, it's better than looking at a work presentation, I think. So, all right. Thanks a lot for watching.